Class is now in session. I am Professor Hockey, and today we're discussing the game between the Sharks and the Panthers, in which the Sharks lost 6-2. Now, the third game in a row in which the Sharks have, I guess, technically led in 6 goals, even though 2 of them against the Coyotes were empty net. The game started off very slow. This looked like it was going to shake up to be a very low-scoring game, a very boring game. It's in Florida, and no offense to the Panthers, but they certainly don't have the greatest or the biggest fan base, I should say. So there was not much energy in the building. We're coming up to the All-Star game break, so there's not much energy. Whereas 50 games into the season, so there's not much energy. And so just in general, it was a slow first period. The Panthers are the only team to score a goal in that one. It was just a nice shot by Ekblad. And so by the end of the first, it was 1-0. The second period did come around, and the energy began to pick up. Some more fans ran into the stadium, and so there was a bit better atmosphere in all of it. And so the Sharks ended up playing a much better second period. They got goals from Couture and Meyer. Meyer's goal was somewhat controversial, actually. This was one of those that really could have gone either way. I mean, as a Sharks fan, I was happy, and I'm sure Panthers fans were upset. And if it was the opposite direction, and it was the Panthers who got a goal like this, I would be upset as a Sharks fan. I'm sure Panthers fans would be happy, because this was one of the closest goaltender interference calls I've ever seen. This was really gray. This was basically a 50-50, and I certainly don't envy the referee who had to make a call like this. At this point, you're just disappointing thousands of fans, whether it goes either way, because I like to think when it's like an obvious goaltender interference call, yeah, you're going to be disappointing some people, but I feel like most rational fans will accept the fact. But this was just so 50-50 that you probably could have flipped a coin and had it be more fair than whatever the referee could have announced. But the Sharks get the break, and yet it did not end up mattering. Mike Matheson had scored earlier, so it was 2-2 by the end of the second period. And the Sharks, who had good third periods during their 7-game winning streak, basically completely fall apart in this one. Evander Kane with a LeBanc-esque type of penalty, basically just a completely careless penalty, not like intentional, not predatory or anything like that, just not controlling his stick well. Gets a bit unlucky that it actually cuts Nick Bjugstad in the upper lip, so they get a 4-minute power play. And Keith Yandle's shot, seeing eye, that somehow goes through like 5 players. Pretty lucky, but it ends up going in. 3-2 Panthers. Then Shemek, not the best ice in Florida. He catches a rut in the ice. He falls over. 4-2. At that point, the wheels fall off. Vetrano makes it 5-2. Jones gets pulled. Bjugstad late again on the power play makes it 6-2 on past Arundel. And so the Sharks, they came in tied into the third period. They just needed 20 minutes to try and close this one out. And yes, the Panthers were playing their final game before their All-Star break. And so this was another empty-the-tank game for a team the Sharks were against, while the Sharks had to play tomorrow in Washington. The 2 points were there for the taking, and they just couldn't take advantage of it. First thing to talk about is Martin Jones. Obviously, we have to talk about him. He lets in 5 tonight, and he gets pulled. He led in 6 the previous night against the Tampa Bay Lightning, so that's 11 goals in 2 games. And looking on the outside, from the outside, most people say that the main issue with the Sharks going forward is the goaltending. Jones' save percentage now below 900 again. I think it was actually below 900 going into this game anyway, after the Tampa one. And it is a bit of an issue. This game, I don't think, again, was sort of like the Tampa one. I don't think he was terrible. I don't think he had much of a chance on any of the first 3 goals. Ekblad and Yandel's shots were perfectly placed. Matheson on the 2-on-1. But the Trocheck goal, similar to the Victor Hedman one that made it 4-2 for the Lightning the other game, it came down to the fact that, yeah, it was a good opportunity for the other team to score, but you hope that Jones can make a save like that, because it wasn't impossible to make. And if Jones comes up big with that one and the Sharks can kill off the rest of the penalty, they're only down 1. But letting in that goal really deflates the team. Now all of a sudden you've let in 2 power play goals within 9 seconds of each other, and you're down 4-2. You're down 2 goals, and that's why it ends up being 6-2. And so you hope Jones can make up with a big save like that. Not to say he didn't make any big saves this game. The Sharks had a power play earlier on, I believe in the second period, and the Panthers got like 3 shorthanded chances that Jones had to make some nice saves on. But still, you hope he makes the one on Trocheck. He didn't have much of a chance on the Vetrano one. Dell didn't have much of a chance on the Bjugstad one, so not a terrible game for the goaltenders necessarily. But again, you look at 6 goals scored by the other team, and you can't say that Jones was solid in this game. Next is Meyer, as I guess the one good news from this one is that Meyer broke his goal streak, and he certainly came as close as possible to not getting this goal. I mean, not only was this basically a 50-50 when it came to the goaltender interference, but I wouldn't even be surprised if by the end of this taping of this video that they give the goal to Joe Pavelski. It really does come that close, and maybe the NHL will be nice and just give it to Meier to get him off this goal slump, because I think there was now 17 or 18 games in a row where he hadn't scored a goal. Hopefully this could be the floodgates. It's normally a goal like this, like a gritty type of goal that you basically force in, where that takes to break a huge goal drought like this. And now Meier tied with the team lead in goals with, I think, Kane and Hurdle with 19, and hopefully he can get back on track, because the Sharks certainly need that. Next is the new lines. So DeBoer found out that Radil maybe wasn't working on the first line in those 3 games or so. Then the previous game against the Lightning, he saw that maybe LeBanc wouldn't work, and so he decided to switch it up. He moves Pavelski from the Thornton-Sorensen line to the first line, Meier, Couture, Pavelski, which I'll basically be evaluating these lines based on the first 40 minutes, because the last 20 I don't really like to think of as, in context. And I thought the Meier, Couture, Pavelski line actually looked quite solid. Melker Karlsson was moved up to the Thornton line, which I'm now going to consider the third line with Pavelski gone from it, which was a bit of a surprise. I thought they would move Radil up to that line with Thornton and Sorensen, just because Radil, he was on the first line before, you'd think, but maybe just because Radil hasn't been producing all that much, and I guess Karlsson technically has some previous chemistry with Thornton, although that was a few years ago. And that line actually was also quite solid. I liked Thornton and Thornton's game tonight. I thought he looked pretty good, again, like in the first 40 minutes. The third line stayed the same, and of course the fourth line was Radil, LeBanc, and Goodrow. And so it's an interesting adaptation that the Sharks are running with here. I don't think this is the most sustainable, because I'm not sure how much the Thornton, Sorensen, and Karlsson line will hold up, because Thornton was really good tonight to make this line competitive, and I don't know if that's necessarily something to expect every single night from a player, as advanced as Thornton. Age 39, he can't necessarily show up for every single game, and when you're flanked by Sorensen and Karlsson, not the most experienced and skilled players, no offense to those two, this isn't necessarily the 3 line deep team that you were running previously. And so it's again an issue that the Sharks could try and solve at the trade deadline, but at the moment I guess this is more of a loading up the top 2 lines. Finally, I'll talk about the state of the Sharks, because there is a bit of some overreactions here now that the Sharks have lost 3 in a row, and I think it's important to put this into context of the fact that the Sharks had previously, prior to this 3-game losing streak on this road trip, had won 7 in a row. And I'll just like to clarify a few things for why the sky is not falling in San Jose. The Sharks' offense does not all of a sudden go cold. They are still 3rd in the league when it comes to goals for per game, with over 3.5 goals. The Sharks' goaltending is not going to be the reason the Sharks lose in the first round necessarily. Yes, they've led in 11 goals, or I guess now it's 12 goals in these past 2 games, but it's important to remember that one of those games was against the Tampa Bay Lightning, who lead the NHL in goals for per game with 4 a game, which is an insane number, and the fact that the Sharks are playing not only without Marc-Edouard Vlasic, but also without Erik Karlsson, who you could, at this point, seeing the Sharks without Karlsson these past couple of games, you could say is maybe the most important defenseman on the Sharks this season. And no, the Sharks' power play is not going to implode. They, I believe, should still be top 10 in the league at this point. If there was one thing to worry about, maybe it's the penalty kill, but even then, the Sharks' penalty kill can get back on track. So this is not the end of the world just because the Sharks have lost 3 games in a row. I realize I believe this is the first time this season the Sharks have lost 3 regulation games in a row, and this is certainly not a good look to have going into an all-star break of 10 games. Hopefully the Sharks will win against Washington, but who knows, even if they lose that one. And maybe the Sharks can't actually get first place in the division now. The Calgary Flames are a young, hungry team who are going to look to get that first place. But again, the sky is not falling in San Jose. It's a rough stretch of games here, dealing with a couple of massive injuries. I feel like some people have downplayed how much the Vlasic injury could be affecting this team necessarily, just because of how successful they were when Karlsson was in the lineup and Vlasic was not during that 7-game winning streak. But he is a big part of it, even if he hasn't been having the great season. And Erik Karlsson being out these past 2 games has been a huge loss for the San Jose Sharks, and you could see it defensively. And so the sky is not falling. The Sharks are still in a great position to at least make the playoffs. They'll still be competitive when it comes to the playoffs. That's when the Sharks will turn it on. That's when Martin Jones will turn it on. And so I'm still maybe cautiously optimistic moving forward, but still optimistic nonetheless. that will do it for this review. The Sharks will be back in action for their final game prior to their 10-game break for the All-Star game. That will be against the the 2018 Stanley Cup winning Washington Capitals. Sharks will be facing them for the first time this season. The Capitals are on a bit of a slump of their own, so it'll be interesting to see which of those two teams will be able to bust their slump prior to that All-Star break, because if I'm not mistaken, this will be the Sharks' third game in a row facing off against a team who will be playing their final game before their All-Star break, as they were against the Lightning, the Panthers, and the Capitals now tomorrow. Class dismissed.